So this talk is about building a mathematical model around a board game. There's a lot of topics here that I could cover, and so we're going to cover a lot of different things, and I'm going to go over them fairly quickly and fairly shallowly, because we only have an hour. So we'll go off of it that way. But anyway, I'm JT. Thank you for coming, and let's get started. A lot of people, when I say mathematical model around a board game, a lot of people just inherently go, isn't this just statistics, right? And probability. And no, that's just like the very basic of what we can do. So it could be, but that's just like scratching the surface. So we will cover the basics of those kinds of things today, but mostly we're going to be talking about applying scientific methodology to creativity. And what I mean by that is repeatability. A test or a mathematical model is really a test. If it cannot be repeated, it's not very useful to you because you need to be able to know, you need to be able to measure things to see how your change has affected your model, right? We also need mathematical equivalency, aka balance. So when you're testing, a lot of the reason that you'll do a mathematical model for a game is to ensure that the game has some level of balance relative, the various factions in the game or the various components are balanced relative to each other. The different components, might have an in-game cost, and they need to relatively to each other. Like this one costs 3 gold pieces and that one costs 17. Well, the reason it costs 17 is because it does all this stuff, right? So your mathematical model says, here are all the things, here are all the reasons why this one should cost 17 and this one only costs 3. So what we're going to cover today are basic distribution stats, so averages and things like that, some build progression, a central currency model, which you can use for mathematical equivalency. You can also use it for subjective concepts, things that don't have a number associated with them. And then I'm going to finish out today with talking about building simulations. And that's really getting into computer programming, which I'm not expecting everyone here to know anything about computer programming, but I will advocate that you should pick it up. Computer programming can do a lot of really amazing things for you, not just at your job, but in things like this, in board games. So there are a lot of free sites like Udemy, Code Academy, things like that, where you can go out and learn how to program in JavaScript or pick a language of your choice. I'm going to show you stuff that I did in Perl in this case. But it really doesn't matter the language, the name of the language, just pick something up because it can help you in all kinds of aspects of your life. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. So, where am I at here? Here we go. So we're going to talk about distribution stats. This is not about probability yet. We'll get into probability in a second. Distribution stats are just collecting basic numbers about your game. So this is like how many components of a given type do you have, right? Also a total, a count, a sum, that sort of thing. The average values across all of those components. A median. I'll just say. So median versus average, this is something not everybody knows about, but you should know about it. So if you have a list of a bunch of different items, and I'm going to show some examples of this in a little bit, but if you have a list of a bunch of different items, the average, maybe it's ranging between 1 and 10, the average might come out to be 5. It might look like 5, but if you did the median is the middle element of that list, and that median might be 2. You thought your average is 5, so it's evenly distributed, but in reality, the median is going to show you your distribution because it's the middle point in the whole list of things. And then mode and range. So let's talk about this. Most people are going to do this kind of stuff in a spreadsheet. That's the easiest way to use it. Again, it doesn't matter what spreadsheet you use. You can use Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel, or in my case, I was using Numbers here, Apple Numbers. Doesn't really matter. But here's a little spreadsheet just that you might have in some game. So we have our different weapons from this particular game. The chance to hit with each of those weapons, the amount of damage it's going to do, and whether it is a blunt or bladed weapon, right? Because maybe there are, in this particular game, maybe there's different types of armor. So you have blunt armor versus, penetration armor. So this is what a total looks like, or a sum, or a count. So at the bottom, there's our spreadsheet again at the top. I've just added one row at the bottom. We can see that in this case, the total isn't very relevant for the percentages. We don't really need to add those up, but it's there anyway. But we can see the total amount of damage across all these different things. We can see how many blunt versus how many bladed weapons we have. And that can be useful because, if you aren't looking at the totals, you might all of a sudden have 15 bladed weapons and only 3 blunt weapons. And so at that point, why is blunt in the game? That might be a component you could remove, or maybe you need to rebalance things a little bit. Does that make sense? Okay, so averages. This is again showing you kind of the basic distribution of your numbers. This one, the average hit rate is 62% across that whole thing. That can be interesting because that's kind of at the midpoint of your game. People are going to have a 62% chance of hitting something, assuming that there's a progression to the whole thing. The amount of damage somebody's going to do is 3.2 on average, and then how likely is it that they're going to have a blunt weapon versus a bladed weapon, right? Median. So if we look back at our average here for a second, and then I'm going to flip back and forth between median and average. So here's a median, here's an average, median, average, median, average. So you can see that the median is showing that really the damage that people are likely to do at the midpoint of the game is 2, not 3.2. And that could affect your numbers. So if you're sending enemies at them that are able to withstand 2 damage, those enemies are just going to overrun them, right? That sort of thing in the balance of your game. And I realize I'm talking about a very simplistic combat type game. This stuff applies to any kind of game, right? I'm just using this as an example to illustrate the point, because I don't want to confuse it in the mechanics of a game. I want to just talk about the very simple elements that are going on here. On average, we have 0.4 blunt weapons. At a median level, we have 0 blunt weapons, right? So because again, we're talking about the middle number, there are 5 things here, and 3 of them are 0 for the blunt thing, so the middle thing is 0. That's the median. Actually, I'm going to skip over mode. Because that one doesn't come up as often. I'll show it to you here, but I'll cover it a little bit more later. I'm just going to skip that one for now. We'll come back to it. Range. So the range of your numbers is very interesting to see. We're not talking about, okay, we can go from 0 to 100%, right, in percentages. But really, the range here is the difference between the lowest value and the highest value, right? That's the important thing. So a lot of people if they look at a percentage, well, percentages go 0 to 100, so it makes sense, But within your game, percentages only go from 50 to 75. So our range is 25%. Looking at those kind of things, it helps you see maybe where you have a hole in your logic, right? Or maybe it's just a hole in the perception of the player, which is an important thing too. They're thinking, well, somebody might have a 0% thing. So they're looking at a 50% weapon and they're like, oh, that's pretty good. No, that's crap, right, in this game. So range is very important in your design of your game. So takeaways. Totals just are good for an even distribution of your component types. The averages can show trends in things, but they're not good to show you kind of the middle of the range. Instead, what you want there is your medians. Modes, that's right, I wanted to come back to this. Modes are good for showing you standouts in your component data. So if I go back to mode here, we can look at some standout things. Mode is the thing that comes up most frequently in a list. Okay, I didn't define that before. I kind of skipped over it. Doesn't matter, whatever. So the thing that comes up most frequently in the percentage list is 75. Actually, 50 and 75 both come up in there. So in this list, it could be both of those would be the mode. but it depends on how you're calculating the mode into your thing, whether you're taking multiple values or just one. So in this case, most of the time, if you're only taking one value, it's the highest value in the mode list. So your damage, 2 is your mode, because the most things in your list that have 2, or that have a number are 2, right? So anyway, that's where mode can come into things. Sorry. Okay. And then finally, ranges can help you see if you have too little or too much variance across a whole set of objects. Now, this is very remedial stuff that I'm covering here. Maybe to some of you it won't be, but I wanted to get it out so that we all had a common language definition of some of these terms, because as we go through some of these other things, it may be useful to be able to converse and use the same language that, across all of us, all right? So now we'll move into probability. Unless anybody has questions about the basics before we move on. Okay. So probability is really a ratio of the stuff you want to happen versus the total possible things that can happen. It's like that, to put it simply, that's, the stuff that makes you happy, the thing that you want to happen, is at the top, and then it is a fraction divided by the things that total could possibly happen. So getting cake today would make me happy, right? But the other food options, there are 10 other food options, so that's 1 out of 11 is my probability that I'm going to get cake. That's the deal. So in this case, let's oh right, yeah, let's talk about. A lot of people use the term probability when they're talking about skill-based things. Probability and skill don't go hand in hand. Probability is about determining random outcomes. Skill, there are other measurements you can use to skill, and you can technically apply probability to skill, but really we're talking about random events when you're talking about probability. So things like dice, right? So let's use a common thing that you might do in a board game, right? Everybody has probably played a game at some point where you have a bag and you're pulling stuff out of a bag, right? So if you know the distribution of things in the bag, then you can calculate the probability of what you might pull out of the bag. So again, the favorable outcome versus the total number of possibilities. So in this case, we have 8 cubes. 2 of them are black, 2 of them are purple, and 4 of them are blue. So what's the probability of drawing a purple cube from this bag? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. So our formula is going to look like that, and 25% is correct. So it's 2 out of 8, which can be, further reduced to 1 out of 4, which can then be converted to a decimal, which then can be converted to a percent. Again, that's remedial. I'm guessing most of you learned that in grade school, but it's useful to just show it here in case you hadn't. So if you do this experiment, this test, 4 times, you can expect to get 1 purple cube.
Assuming you're replacing the...
Yes. Yeah. Yep. We'll get to that. Now, here's the thing. I use the word expect in that sentence there because we all know you might have had a streak where you got all blue cubes every time. So probability isn't telling you you will get that thing. It's just the distribution of random events that could occur. Chances are, if you do this 4 times, you would get 1 cube, right? Okay. So let's say we repeated that 8,000 times. What can we expect to get? Anybody?
2,000.
All right. See? Simple. You guys got it. No problem. 2,000 is correct. What is the probability that we draw 1 blue?
50.
That's right. Yes, 50%. So that's simple stuff, right? This is just basic probability. So again, if I mentioned this a second ago, but I want to go over it one more time because sometimes this doesn't sink into people. If I draw this 10 times in a row, I might actually get 10 blues in a row, right? It's about that word expect. Because expectations, like just rolling a die, you might roll all ones. Or if you're playing Axis and Allies like me, I never roll any ones. I mean, it just never happens. It's ridiculous. but anyway, it's a prediction, not a law, right? It is just the more times you do it, the more likely the probability is to be deterministic at that point. But it still isn't. It isn't 100% chance that it's going to do that. It's still probability. It's just the likelihood. It's not the actuality of the thing. But the more times you repeat an experiment, the better probability plays out. So basically what I'm saying there is in a game, in one instance of a game, you might have a bad luck streak. But in the law of averages, over the course of the 100 times that the game gets played, it will come out more often than not according to probability or close to probability. So then let's talk about compound probability. This makes it a little bit more difficult, a little bit more mathy. So what's the probability of drawing 2 purple cubes in a row? Now, some of you may already know this, but I'm going to go through it just quickly. I'm not going to ask you to know this. So the first cube that you draw out of this, basically what we talked about before. So now we've got 10 cubes in this bag rather than 8. The first time you draw is just like what we talked about before. But in this case, we're not putting the cube back in the bag, right? The next cube we draw, it's removing, so the set has changed. So the second time is 2 out of 9. Assuming I succeeded at the first one. And when you're doing probability, you're always assuming the first one, or doing compound probability, you're always assuming the first one succeeded, because if the first one didn't succeed, then everything else is lost anyway, right? So assuming the first one got what we wanted, the second one will have a 22% chance of succeeding. Now, to calculate what the compound probability is, you just multiply those things together. Does that make sense? So here's how the formula actually works, right? We have our 3 over 10, 2 over 9. So we're going to multiply 3 times 2. We're going to multiply 9 times 10. That gets 60 out of 9, or 6 out of 90. Then that can be reduced to 1 out of 15, which gets us our 6.7%. Make sense? Okay. I know this is all kind of, basic math again, but not everybody covered probability in high school or college. So I thought it was
many
or it was many, many years ago. So I wanted to make sure that we repeated all of this stuff. I actually, if you guys got the USB stick, this presentation is in there. And I left probability out initially. I was not going to cover it. And then I was talking to some people, and they convinced me that that was wrong. I should cover this right at the beginning because, yeah, like you said, this isn't stuff you use in your everyday life. So even if you did learn this at some point in your life, you may have forgotten it. So anyway, Okay, so let's talk about rolling a die. What's the probability of rolling a number greater than 4 twice in a row? So the first time you roll it.
Oh, greater than 4.
Yeah.
That was greater or equal.
Yeah, greater than, not greater than or equal. So there's 2 out of the 6, right? So the first time you roll it is 33.3%. And the second time you roll it is 20%, right? Right. That's clearly wrong. So the thing with a chit pull, or you're taking something out of a bag, you're removing it, so you're changing the set. But when you're rolling dice, the dice doesn't lose pips after you roll it. Like, it still has all those pips, right? You're not down to a D5 after you roll a D6. So yeah, so clearly we want to do that again. The probability going through this is really 33% each time, which means that you're compounding at 22%, because you're getting less likely that you're going to do 2 things in a row as you go. Okay. So moving on. What's that? Or was it 25%?
I think you multiply them.
Did I not multiply them? I'm sorry. I may have gotten my slide wrong here because I threw in probability at the last second. I think I mentioned that. So I was just whipping through these slides.
Yeah, it should be 4 out of 36.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I did it wrong there.
1 out of 9.
Thank you for catching me. See, everybody can get this wrong. Yeah, it was a test. I meant to do that.
Wrong on the internet.
Yeah. Hey, I'm wrong at least 49% of the time, so it's fine. Okay. So what we're talking about here are dependent versus independent events. So dependent events are things like drawing cards, picking from a bag, that sort of thing. What it means is that these are events that where the thing is that you're doing is not returned to the pool of possible things, right? Now they can be, if you're gonna, after every card draw, you reshuffle the deck, then the probability is back to what it was. But that's not how most card games work. You don't reshuffle the deck after every card draw, right? So those are dependent events. Now, independent events are things like rolling a die, spinners, flipping a coin, that kind of stuff. It's stuff where it doesn't change after the pool. Everything is returned back to normal in the pool after you have done it. Because, again, dice don't lose sides when you roll them. Well, maybe they do, because there's those dice I've seen where people can pop on a side. I don't know what those are. Rattlebones? Rattlebones. Yeah. So they could lose a side, I suppose, in that case, but generally speaking. Okay. So at the beginning I said that probability is mostly about random events occurring. This is dice and cards and things like that. It's not skill. You can, I lied a little bit, all right? It's not entirely true. You can apply probability to skill if you have a way to measure the skill, all right? You can use, if you can objectively measure one skill versus another skill, then you can kind of use probability to determine what the outcome is going to be. But there's usually a better way, because usually there are curves that you're going to apply to this, so it becomes more of a formula rather than probability. It's there's going to be some other kind of scale that's introduced to the whole equation. So if you were going to use ranks in probability, you could do this kind of a two-player game, this person's skill versus that other person's skill. This is how you would measure it. But if you follow any kind of sports or events where where people are tracking skills and statistics over time, you'll know that they don't use probability in these things. They apply formulas. So for example, a very famous one in chess, there's an ELO rating system that is used. And there's a complicated formula that they've used to determine the likely outcome. And using that formula, it is far more accurate than probability to determine the likelihood that one player will defeat another player in a chess game, right? And a chess game, again, it's pure skill. There's no random events that happen in chess. So moving on, unless there are questions about probability before we move on. No? Okay, cool. So let's get into the meat of today's talk then. And let's start off by talking about build progression. This is a very simple concept you can do without any computer-aided tools at all. You can just do this with some pieces if you want. Build progression is basically a test of how things move in your game. How do the different components play out as the game progresses? The thing that you want to do here is you're going to worry about one thing, not everything. So you're not going to worry about impedance. Impedance being something like getting in the way, right? So you're not going to worry. You're going to worry about what happens with player one. Forget about player two at this point. You're going to worry about faction A, forget about faction B. You're going to worry about how does this mechanic play out over time, not all of the other mechanics that are in the game. So don't worry about those other subsections or subsystems. So here's a scenario for you. You have a board. Each row has 12 spaces on the board, right? So we're making a long, narrow board. You have a deck of cards that determines how things are added to the board and how fast they move. So let's simulate two things interacting without interference. So just how does the board move, or how do the pieces move along that board given the random distribution of how they might come out on the thing. So you can do this on paper. You can do this on a computer program. I'll show you one in a second that I did using Illustrator to do this. But you can do this in a spreadsheet. You can do it on a piece of paper. There's a lot of ways to do it. So let's just do one right here on screen quick. So there's the board that I talked about. Right? We've got 6 rows and 12 columns. Okay? And so we're going to randomly add a piece to the board. Oh, we got a star. A star only moves at one space per turn. Okay? So we'll see the star moving down the track. And the second time, we drew another star. So we know how stars work. So these two are just going to kind of follow each other, right? Oh, we drew a third star. Okay? So this is, we kind of know what the progression is going to happen here. Now, oh, we drew something else this time. This time, we got ourselves a diamond. How do diamonds work? Well, they're going to work at twice the speed of a star, let's say. So at this point, the stars, all of the stars, are 3 turns ahead of the diamond, right? We know we've done 3 moves of those stars. So can we predict, will the diamond beat the stars to the end of the board, you know, moving twice the speed, or do these other guys have a head start enough to stay ahead of them? And so there's, you know, after the next turn, I'm not going to add any more. We're just going to see how this plays out. You can kind of see what's happening here, right? Now, this is a stupidly simple example, right? Your game is going to be more complex than this, almost assuredly. But I'm thinking it will. I'm thinking it will. I've played your games, so I'm pretty sure it's gonna. Now, so we knew what was going to happen as we started playing this out, right? We knew that the diamond was going to win in this case. So let's just go ahead and animate its way through there. But doing this sort of build progression with just this one thing, you can see if the pieces are where you thought they would be at any stage of the game, right? Because we're not worrying about impedance here. That's the important bit with a build progression. Don't worry about impedance, just see where these pieces are, and then do the build progression for the next side and see where it is. And then by separating out these components, by removing impedance and just doing the build progression for each thing, you can kind of see where the balance is of each side, right? So that's what build progression is all about. So here's an example that I did in Illustrator for a game that I'll actually have up at Protospiel tomorrow, called Dangerous Planet. It's the 4th episode of The Captain is Dead. So here we're on an alien planet. We have this kind of weird pattern to the board, and these aliens are streaming out of their spawn locations. So I'm trying to see how quickly are they going to, and actually I have this kind of in reverse, don't I? I do, yeah. So the spawn locations are out at the end of the tentacles, and the ship that they are going to attack is here. So I am actually going to animate this in reverse, I just realized. But the point is, you can see how the aliens are progressing towards the ship. So here's the end condition of what happened, and there's the middle, and there's that. So there were actually far more frames of this as I was doing it. I'm just showing you a couple of frames of this progression. So I just took an Illustrator and put the pieces out on my virtual board, and then as I drew a card, I would place the pieces onto there. I would save that frame as an artboard, and I would move to the next artboard, copy everything from the first artboard to the second artboard, and do this again. And I'd keep doing that over and over. And the reason I would do that rather than doing it on paper on the table is that I could at any point look back and see where something changed in my progression. Does that make sense? So you can do this on paper, or on paper too, by taking out your phone and taking a snapshot. Every time you move stuff, take a photo. Move it to the next progression, take a photo, right? So you don't have to use Illustrator to do this sort of thing. You can do it here with paper and a camera. You can also just record it with a pencil, but I don't know, that seems like a lot of work. So, especially for as many iterations as you're probably going to go through, or at least if you're like me. So that's the point, is that these build progressions allow you to kind of see how these things are interacting with each other, so that you can see that the flow is what you were expecting the flow to be. So let's do a simulation. Let's do my first simulation, and then we'll come back and do another one in a bit. Let's see here. Come on. Here we go. So, Oh, you can't see that. Guess I'll just move this over here. Okay, so this is just a command line program that I wrote that'll output some iterations of this is a different game completely, of how an alien is going to spawn and move out across this board. How are they going to place their various buildings, and how are their troops going to move, and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to run that. I did 100 simulations there, but we're going to just back up and look at just one of the simulations. We're going to look at the last one. And so all right, so here we go. So there's the board when we start, right up here. We've got, you can see that there are 4 aliens, and there's 1 spawner. That's what the little asterisk is doing. 1 spawner, 4 aliens, and then we have 0 aliens in the rest of the board in this case, right? So then when we move after turn 1, those 4 aliens have moved to this space, and the spawner has created another alien. After turn 2, those 4 aliens have converted themselves into a spawner, but that spawner isn't ready to start spawning yet. That's why it's a period rather than an asterisk in this case. That other spawner, or the other guy that was here, has moved up here, and now we've got another alien spawned from this spawner. And we continue on. This spawner is still not ready. All 3 of the aliens have moved into this one space with this spawner. And now they've moved up here. We spawned another one. This spawner is finally ready, but hasn't spawned an alien yet, and so on. So you can kind of see the progression. The aliens are moving over here. Now they're moving around. Now there's 3 there, right? Now this is just random what they're doing here. I didn't put in a very fancy AI into this particular simulator because I didn't want to build a fancy AI into the board game. I was trying to see what would happen if I just had random cards that determine kind of things going out, or random dice rolls that determine things going out, rather than having a human play this role and see how it would progress, right? And so over the course of the game goes for, I think it's 24 turns, something like that. Yeah, 24 turns. I can see at the end what happened. There's all these different spawners that appeared. We have all these different aliens kind of in the middle here. Now, if I looked up at some of these other simulations, you can see that it turned out a little different. Now they're down in this corner over here more, and there's 17 aliens in this one spot. And if I looked up at a different simulation, there's some here. The point is that with a simulation, if you write it into code, you saw I did 100 simulations there in 1 second, right? Versus writing out this build progression, doing it manually, placing things, that'll take you a lot longer. So this is where code can really help you in your board game design, is you can kind of put in some very simple parameters and see what happens. Does that make sense? Any questions? Okay. So, and that code sample is on your USB stick. So, okay. And by the way, all of the simulations that are on there are just things I whipped up really quickly. So please, I'm sorry there's not like good documentation and all that. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on to assigning value to things. This is assigning value is really about creating a central currency for your game. The central currency is a way to have. Okay, let's back that up for a second. Just in human culture, we started out as a barter and trade society, right? Like just humans in general. We didn't have currency. There wasn't a dollar. There wasn't a euro back in the day. People would, if you wanted some rice, you might have to trade your furs to get some salt, and then trade the salt to get the rice, right? It's not very. There's no way to do comparative values between different things if you don't have some kind of central currency, right? And so your game may not show the central currency to the player, but your mathematical model has to have a central currency so that you can balance one thing versus another thing. Does that make sense? Okay. So you need to create this central currency creates a relationship between all of the features of your game. Everything gets built into your mathematical model eventually. And some items might be overvalued compared to other central currency. So then you would subtract or divide the value of that item to get it to match the relative value of the central currency. Does that make sense? So your central currency, 1 unit of your central currency, this thing is overpowered, relatively speaking, or underpowered, relatively speaking, whichever. So you'll multiply or divide, add or subtract to get that thing to have a value that's relative to your central currency. So let me use a real world example. This is a game I did a few years ago. A couple of the things that are, every tile has some icons on it which give you different attributes for things. So the blue tile, or the blue circle, is actually the central currency in this game. It's the cost of that tile. The yellow there is for culture, and the red is for military, the red star. So in this case, for my central currency, I decided that that culture and military are equal to each other, but relative to central currency, they are 1 point times more valuable than central currency. So for every 1 point of central currency, or for every 1 point of military, it's 1.7 points of central currency. Does that make sense? You're just multiplying 1.7 times the other thing. So a monument in this case, which is the top one there, it has a value of 2.
Worth less than the, yeah.
Did I say that backwards?
I think so. I think they're both less than, because if you're multiplying their value
Right.
to get equivalent.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway,
Sorry.
where was I? So currency value gives you 3.4 on the thing, but you'll note that 4 doesn't add up there. We'll get to that in a second. It's 3.4 right now, but you know the circle, the blue circle there is 4. We'll get to that in a second. The outpost here only has 1, so it's 1.7, right? And then, again, it doesn't add up because there's 1.7 does not equal 3. So there's obviously more to it than that. One thing I didn't tell you in this case is that all tiles have a central currency value, a minimum thing of 1. They all have 1, right? As just a base, just because tiles themselves are valuable. So that gives us a central currency value of 4.4 and 2.7. And when you're doing this sort of stuff to represent it in a game, you can't really use decimal numbers. People don't want to deal with decimal numbers. So instead, you just round to the nearest integer. So 4.4 rounds down to 4, and 2.7 rounds up to 3 in this case. Okay, it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So any questions about that? Okay, so let's do a little bit different example then. So I'm introducing a couple of new things here. The orange one is for storage, and the green one is for income. So 1.2 is the storage, and the income, number of paths on a tile also has an effect for it. So the storage tent there has 4 paths. The previous 2 tiles didn't matter. They had 3 paths, right? But when you get there, when you get to there, the number of paths minus 3 is going to adjust their cost in central currency. It's better to have more paths. So therefore the tent, we're going to round the number. We get 1 for the base. We get 1.2 times 3 for the storage part. And then we also have 1 extra one there because we have an extra path, right? So that gives us our formula for that. And then if we get over to income is just like culture and military in the game, so it's 1.7, right? So there's our formula there. It's 1 for the basic tile, 1.7 because it's a value of 1 on the tile. And then it's minus 2 because it only has 1 path rather than 3 paths, right? So again, this is mathy, but it's a mathematical model seminar, so you should be used to that by now. Anyway, so by putting these things together, and the model that I'm using here is irrelevant, right? Like this is just an example to show you. You need to build a model for your own game to make everything, relative to each other. So let's see if you picked up on what's going on here. So can you calculate the cost of an animal farm? Yeah.
So I guess with that aspect and ignoring the fact that there's tiles and stuff, but a good aspect of that, like 1.7 versus 1.2, would be useful in a game when you're saying, well, I would like more storage up there.
Right.
Kind of aspect, right?
Mhm.
Like, my game is breaking because I don't have enough X, Y, something's in there. Adjust its ratio.
Right.
To make it be, in this case, cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. You need to, if things are coming out too often, then you make them a little more expensive. If they're not coming out enough, you make them cost a little less, and then that whole thing helps you balance your game relative to each other. So these numbers are arbitrary, the 1.7 and 1.2. These are things I found out through playtesting, and we're adjusting them kind of over time. To start with, you might make them all just 1 point each, perfectly equivalent to central currency, and then you can start adjusting from there. Yeah. So, okay. So I've covered up the cost of the animal farm here. So can somebody tell me what you think the cost of this animal farm should be relative to what we've talked about so far?
6.
I got one that says 6. Anybody else different? Everybody thinks 6?
Yeah.
All right. That's true. There's where you get to. It's 6. There's the formula of how we got there. What's that?
Yeah, if I remember what the right numbers you had.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so we'll do one more of these and see how your memory tests out. What about the war tent? Am I breaking everybody's brains? Yeah, 7 is correct, yes. So that's, again, the formula of how we got there. You can see it gets more complicated the more things you have going on, but the point is, depends on your game how many things are happening and how you want to measure things and whether you measure them at all. You'll note on all of these tiles, for example, there are little dots down the sides of each of the tiles. That tells you how many of that tile is in the game. But at no point am I building that into the model here. In some games, you would build it in the model because a more rare tile might be more valuable, right? So anyway, let's deal with non-numeric attributes. So far we've been doing something that's simple. All these things have a numerical value associated with them, right? So in this case, we got a farmstead, and you'll note that there's a little shield at the top there. There's another icon. There's no number on that icon, though, right? It's just a special ability. So if we didn't take into account that icon up there, the formula would work out so that it's that the value is 6 for this tile. But because we've added this extra thing, we have to account for a special ability. And with these kind of subjective things, you're just going to pull a number out of your butt. You're just going to put something on there. But through playtesting, the relative power of one thing versus another thing. So you can start to assign, once you have a central currency model where you can compare how valuable this thing is versus that thing, now you can start to compare arbitrary things that don't have a numeric value associated with them, and you can assign a numeric value for how powerful that special ability is. Does that make sense? It's all because you had that central model to begin with, that central currency, that allows you to assign a value to this arbitrary thing. Okay? So, and this, just like the other thing that we talked about, will be adjusted through playtesting. You might start it with 5 and eventually realize that nobody's using that ability because it's too costly, so then you reduce it a little bit. And generally speaking, when you're doing these kinds of reductions or additions, the rule I like to go with is have it or double it. If you think you might just want to add +1, do more, because you'll get to your answer faster. If you double it, you'll immediately know whether you went far enough or you went too far, and then you can either come back or go further. But if you only go up by little increments, you'll have to do a lot more tests to get to that eventual whatever the number is. Does that make sense? Okay. So other things other intangibles that you can factor in. Oh, I'm sorry. Was there
I was just wondering if you ever affect the ability rather than the cost.
Oh yeah, you can absolutely tune the ability rather than the cost if you are okay modifying the ability. It really depends on your game, right? Everybody in here has a different game, so I can't use an example that would apply to everybody because your powers are going to be different, or if you even have powers in your game that aren't numeric. So you can absolutely adjust the power. The problem there is that now you're having to retest again. So because you don't have a starting point for that new power, it's got a completely different thing. Also, a lot of times once you have an ability in the game, you put it in there for a reason. So you want to get it in there and you want to keep it and just tweak it until you can't. Sometimes you'll find that you have to remove it because it's just too powerful or too weak or whatever. The reason that it's being used isn't because of its cost, it's because it doesn't apply to the game, that sort of thing. So anyway, any other questions before we? Okay. So other things that you can factor in, other intangibles that you can factor into your game that aren't necessarily, they aren't values. They're not mathematical values. So obviously we talked about character player abilities. That little shield there is an ability of the tile. You can also add in difficulty levels. So, how does that factor into the cost of something? Maybe when you're playing the game, difficulty level, you multiply everything by 2 because it's a more, for this player, the cost of this player, everything's multiplied by 2 or +1 to this player because of that kind of thing. You can do probabilities like we talked about before. How often does something happen in a game? Or we were talking about the tiles where I have the little dots on the side. How often does it come up in the game? That's actually more availability than probability, but if it's a pull mechanism, then it would be probability. Prerequisites. So this particular game that I've been showing here has some prerequisites. So the cost of prerequisite things are lower because they're less useful if you don't have the other thing. And availability is the thing we talked about with the dots. So lots of different things. And this is just a starter list for the other kind of subjective stuff that you can apply. So central currency is very useful. Starting that, and that's really the model that we're talking about here. When I'm talking about building a mathematical model for your game, central currency is the thing that we're talking about. Because if you don't have a relativistic comparison for all the components of your game, you can't build a model that's going to allow you to balance them relative to each other. It's not possible. I mean, you can stumble into it, I suppose, but that's like, you don't want to do that, right? You want to make your playtests more effective. Playtester time is very valuable. So central currency is, again, useful for assigning a cost to things, like those tiles that I showed you where the cost is actually printed right on the tile. It can be very useful for that kind of thing. It can also be useful for assigning a number of actions that this thing should take. If it's more powerful, it uses more actions that you're spending in that way. So it's not a monetary cost in the game. It's a how many turns does it take or that sort of thing. And of course, like I said, is it balanced relative to everything else in the game? Whether it's winnable at a given difficulty, and also the relative swing that a new component could add for your thing. So you've been balancing your game. You've got this game and it's playable and it's fun. Now I want to throw an expansion in, right? And how does that expansion fit into the overall game? How is it going to swing things? Or I add a new character that has this special power. How is that going to fit? By having this central currency model, you can see, how those changes are going to affect your game. Now, none of this, I want to be very clear here, none of this that we're talking about today has anything to do with how fun your game is, right? Building a mathematical model isn't going to make your game more fun, right? In fact, in general, you shouldn't be trying to make your game fun, because fun, there's no measurement for fun. Maybe a barrel of monkeys is a measurement for fun, but how do you measure a barrel of monkeys? I don't know. Fun-sized Snicker bars, you could measure it that way, but those are the small ones, and nobody likes those. So, I don't know. What's your measurement for fun? So what you should be doing to measure your game is, instead of fun, measure it off of how interactive it is, how engaged people are when they're playing when you're playing your game. That is a measurement of fun that you can actually, you know, measure. You can see, are they talking with each other and engaging with each other and having, you know, conversations and building friendships by playing your game, or maybe building, you know, enemies by playing your game? Or are they looking at their phone the whole time, or thinking about the next game they want to play, or where am I going to go for lunch, right? Engagement is the measurement of fun. It's not any other arbitrary thing. So the mathematical model isn't going to help you make your game more fun, but it can make your game more playable and more balanced, which can lead to better engagement. So if you want to build simulators, that's the last thing we'll talk about here. If you want to build some simulators, you're going to need to learn some code. There's just no way around it. You can technically use a spreadsheet to try and do a simulator. Spreadsheets, though, are good for distributions, like we talked about earlier. You know, when we're talking about averages and medians and all that kind of stuff, it can help you with probability, but it's not going to help you with build progressions. It's not going to help you with logic. It's not going to help you with randomizers. It's not going to help you with long chains of decisions. It's limited in what it can do, even though you can kind of program spreadsheets, and people can do crazy things in spreadsheets. I'm not knocking spreadsheets. I use them all the time. But when it gets down to it, the fancy stuff happens in code, not in spreadsheets. So I'm advocating that everyone here in this room, no matter what you do or what you think, please take some time and learn some code. Again, language is irrelevant. Like, don't worry about whatever language you pick up, fine. That'll be useful for you for this purpose. You don't need to learn whatever, you know, one would be helpful in a job or whatever. It's just, it's for your gaming, right? So do whatever you like. So you can start off with a spreadsheet. So, but to start building your, to build your simulator, you should start off there, because you need to get some values down. You need to get some probabilities down to use as your basis code, but you're not going to use code entirely. So let's take a look at a spreadsheet here, if I can get out. And, oops, should have had this popped up already.
So every time you model a new game, you start in Excel?
I start in numbers because I'm on a Mac. But yes, you can start in Excel. You can start in Google Sheets, whatever. I often will start with just writing stuff in my phone, just taking notes basically of my ideas, and then eventually I will build some kind of spreadsheet that gives me, and it won't be for the whole game. It'll be for some aspect of the game. I'll build out something that can give me some relativistic, again, probabilities of how things will play out with each other. So that way I can sort of tweak some numbers before we even get into writing any code. So here's an example, which is not on your screen. So I pull it over here and see here, can I zoom? That's not doing it. View, zoom. Okay, that should be, is that relatively readable? Okay. So what we're looking at here is, this is a game I never ended up making because I couldn't figure out how to make it work. But this was just one subsystem in the game. This was a combat subsystem for this particular game. First, I was just dealing with some of very basic math, and then I'm like, I want to have some sense of scale to things. So I decided that we'll have your chance to miss, your chance to get a minor hit, a major hit, or a critical hit. I'll divide your attack roll to kind of give you a range of possibilities that were going to happen here. And so then I went through and I built out numbers for so we can see what's going to happen with the minimum amount of damage you could do, the maximum amount of damage you can do at different things here, or the minimum numbers that you're trying to hit, I'm sorry, and then the damage that would do. So in this case, it was don't remember what it was. Was it 2d6? I can't even remember what how this game worked now. It was a while ago. But anyway, I think it was 2d6 or something along those lines. It couldn't have been. Maybe it was a d12. Must have been, because there's a 1 through 12. So anyway, if you got 1 or 2, you'd do 0 damage. That would be a miss. If you did 3 through 8, that would be a minor hit, and you'd do 1 damage. A major hit with fists is no different than a minor hit. But then a critical hit, you could do some, a little bit more damage. But then if you get a knife, you can see that, you're actually cutting into somebody, so you're going to do worse. And an axe will do, can do more damage. And you get into a pistol. And then you might start taking into account some other modifiers here, like long-ranged attacks may apply some other kind of bonus, that sort of thing. So I start going through here and thinking about different weapons that you might use. And then you've got area effect weapons and how will that affect things. So you're just building out a little spreadsheet of these things. And it'll start simple and maybe grow into something more complicated, or maybe not. It may grow into something that you go, I can't build this thing, so let's go on to something else. Anyway, so that's an example of a spreadsheet. So now turning this into a simulator. Let's see, which one of these is that one? That's not it. This one. Here we go. So this is taking into account, this is running simulations. So in this case, I ran 100 simulations, I think. Let's see here. Here's some code. Oh, this one's doing 1,000 combats. All right. So, so this one's doing 1,000 combats, and then it is comparing how are these things actually coming out relative to each other, depending on what you hit with your, and you can see at this point it had moved from a D12 to a D6 when I got to this. So this is just how much damage am I doing for each roll type that I'm getting, how much damage overall am I doing with each of these. What's happening here isn't relevant. Like this game never made it anywhere, so who cares about this particular game? I'm just saying that you can start doing some of these statistical comparisons over a number of combats, and this allows you to playtest 1,000 combats in a second and see how those things will come out. And then you'll tweak the numbers in your actual game to achieve the effect that you want, right? So let's look at a different simulation. This one is, what is this one? Oh, this is a different combat one. Combat is a thing that's easy to simulate. So if there's a combat system in any game, I always write a simulator for it. I don't always have combat systems in every game, but if there is a combat system, I'll write a simulator. So this one, you'll see that there's actually a file that I'm pulling in here, and because the combat, different roles in the game will have different things, different special abilities, different powers, whatever. And so I want to be able to relatively compare one thing versus another thing in the game. And so I'll have all these different config files that'll have all these predetermined things, but I only wrote the engine once that'll actually do the simulation. So here is a simulation that happened between, in this case, what is it? 4 humans versus 1 level 3 alien. Okay. So you can see what, in round 1 of the battle, the Team A, which would be the humans, rolled what they rolled. Team B rolled what they rolled. Team A hit 5 times. Team B hit 7 times. So after all of that, Team B had 0 living. Everybody was at one round of combat. Team A had already defeated Team B, right? So you can kind of see what's going on there, and I can pass in, how many of these simulations do I want to run? Do I want to run 10,000, 1 million of these simulations and see what comes out? Do I want to pass in a different file and try a different kind of simulation? So let's see here. We have 5 minor versus 4 minor characters, and then you can see kind of what's coming out of those kind of things. Again, what the numbers are that are actually appearing on the screen, not relevant. It's going to be different for every game. The point is that I can run these simulations and I can set up different configurations. So when I look in these different files, I can see how are these guys set up? How much health does each one of them have? How many d6 are they rolling? In this case, we just have, they're only rolling 1d6 each. They only have 1 health each, but the difference is that there are 5 of this one and there's only 4 of that one, right? So again, that's where these kind of simulations can help. I showed you this simulation before, which is again a build progression. This simulation over here is, what is this one? Oh, relationships. So I have a game where you're looking for family members, all right? And so over the different number of turns, how likely is it that you're going to find X number of family members based on the rules of the game, right? So I'll run the simulation 100 times quick. We'll just see what happens. So we can see, you know, we ran it 100 times, so there's a bunch of them here, but we'll just look at this last one. I guess this is the last one. So there's 1 people in my group after turn 1. After turn 2, there were 3, and by the time we get to turn 6, there were 12 people in the group. The previous simulation, there were 11 people in the group. The simulation before that, there were only 5 people in the group. So you can kind of see what's progressing based on the decisions that the computer was making in this particular simulation. You're starting to see, is this going to work out the way you anticipated? And what I anticipated, or what I found out from this, is I'm not finding nearly enough people. And the other thing that I found out about this is I was using averages for lots of things. So at one point, while I was doing this, I was averaging exactly what I wanted to see. There were 8 people in every group, averaged across 10 million simulations. I was like, yes, did it. Then I looked at the median, and it turns out that there was 1 person in the group in the median when I was looking at it. So you either did really good or really bad, but there was nothing in between at one point in the simulation once you start looking at the median, right? So that's where the median versus the average can really help you out. Because the game's not going to be very fun if you spent 6 turns and never found any family members, right? So if the whole point of the game was to find family members and you found none, well, that's pretty crappy. And moreover, no one found any. You know, the whole game, no one found any family members. So, okay, this one, what is this? Oh, blot out the sun, right? so there's a simple little video game where you can, you're basically just throwing arrows at each other. And I thought, oh, that'd be a fun little, really fast-paced, real-time card game. So I started building out models of how that might work with different numbers of archers and what kind of upgrades that they were doing. You know, bow, hat, quiver upgrade. Arrows 1, 2, and 3, quiver, hat. You know, these are the different levels of upgrades of one archer versus another archer, right? So every upgrade that you're doing, your better hat gets you, I don't know, better accuracy or something. I forget what it was when I was making this, but the point is you're getting all these different little upgrades throughout the game, and how does that affect the total amount of damage output that you get throughout the game? So what I found out was there in fact was a best path through the game, right? And if there is a best decision that you can make, that's not good. Like, you want to have real decisions and try things out. So if you figured out what the best thing was, you're always going to win, is the bottom line with this progression. And so this is where the simulation was helping me. It's a long chain of decisions, right? To play test that out a million times, to figure that out, would take forever. But by building the simulation, I could do every single decision point relative to every other single decision point. I can start to see where is this going, okay? And that's the kind of stuff you can't do in a spreadsheet. There's these long chains of decisions. So anyway, that's it. That's mathematical models in a nutshell. So yeah.
You know, as you're building the simulations, a lot of that's driven on random, like dice or random drawing cards.
This one isn't done on random.
But at some point, you know, at least for the games I'm thinking of that do this, that I want to build a simulation for, I'd probably spend more time trying to write the AI side of it, where it's like, I have, let's say, actions in my hand or something like that, and I can choose which one I want to play. Now, I could, say, do it randomly, and that may not be the best, you know, in the end, I run 1,000 times, and every single player played a random action.
Yep.
Well, that's not how people play.
Right.
Right. So at that point, the data you get from that might actually be damaging, right?
It could be, yes. Players could go different directions.
One play random. Like, that's a way, right? So, you know, do you find yourself say, okay, well, this person's gonna play random. This person's always gonna play red cards, or
Yeah.
whatever. You know, you can do that kind of thing. But at some point, like, you gotta kind of like, I'm gonna stop writing it because then you're gonna making a video game.
Oh, right, yeah. At no point here are you trying to make a video game. Like, you look at all of this. This is all text-based. It's very simple, like that sort of stuff. So you're absolutely right. At some point, you got to play it with people and see how they're going to go. But if you start noticing patterns in play styles, what you can do is build this kind of decision tree based on those things. And you can say, relativistically, this play style versus that play style, it's pre-programmed. It's not a computer making, you're not actually building a neural network to make these decisions. You're just trying out these different play styles relative to each other and see, is there something else I could introduce that would affect these different things? So I generally use these simulations as my starting point so that I'm not wasting really valuable playtester time on my early stupid mistakes. So I use these really early on to try and get some of the basic math out of the way, and then from there I'm into playtesting, and I'm not worried so much about the simulations anymore. I still use a mathematical model because I'll need to adjust this relative to that, but or as I'm introducing more components. But the simulations, for me, it's the early testing so that I'm not, getting a group of people like we have at Protospiel together, right, to playtest is so rare. Like, even though they're happening one a month at this point around the country, it's still relatively so rare that you're going to go to each of those, that you want to take every last drop of knowledge out of those people. So you want to get your stupid mistakes out of the way before you get there. And some of that you can get through playtesting with your friends and family or your local playtest groups and that sort of stuff. But again, those are rare, relatively speaking, too, compared to the amount of hours you're not with them. So, that's why I build these things. I'm trying to get the really important stuff from the humans and get the stupid stuff out of the way that I can do on my own time. So that may or may not help you. Like, there are plenty of people that don't ever build any of this stuff, and they build perfectly great games. I am not that person. I need this stuff to make this work. So anyway, any other questions, comments, or scathing rebuttal? Yes.
Not the latter. Do you have any thoughts on which kind of program to use for which? Like for me, I don't know any of these programs. I'm very familiar with Excel, and my trading game is pretty complicated mathematically.
Yep.
So I've done a lot of this here, so it's
Yeah.
confirmation. But I'm interested in the simulation because I've tried to simulate it myself, and wow, I mean there's a lot to think about, and I think that there's some potential for this. So I'm wondering if you could maybe talk about a couple of the simulation programs that you're familiar with, and say a little bit about are there any advantages of one versus another?
Okay, so his question is, talk about the different simulation programs. Now, I don't know of any simulation programs. I'm talking about programming languages here. So you're literally, it's a sandbox. You start from nothing and you build whatever you want. And so if you look at the code of these things, they're relatively simple. Like, there's 100 lines of code or something in.
Yeah, that would be useful, just at least for me, at least, to go through a little bit of your code there, so I get an idea of what sort of things
All right.
someone needs to know to do this.
Yeah. So this is my whole program right here. We start off with, here are the upgrade paths that I want to try. In this case, I didn't put it into a config file. I just created an array of arrays. So this is one trial that we're going to do. We're going to start by upgrading Quiver level 1 to Bow level 1 to Hat level 1, and then a couple of arrow upgrades. And then, these other ones have different kinds of things. So we're going Bow 1 to Bow 2, then Quiver 1 to Quiver 2, then arrows, right? So I'm telling, this is my configuration of what simulations do I want to run. So we're going to run them in this order, and then within a simulation, we're going to do the upgrades in this order, okay? And then I run my simulations, and this goes through and does the actual calculation of what's going to happen in the combat. So we're just rolling some dice there quick. And so I have, I'm getting my values for the different archers. I have my simulations of how many times I'm going to run it, and then, kind of go through that and get my results to get my total damage. Then for each of these, I'm just calling another subroutine. So run simulation is actually going to do this code. So this is just basic programming. It's subroutines that I'm calling. So programming language doesn't matter. You can use, like, probably your best starting language these days is going to be JavaScript because it's on everything. It's on your phone, it's on your computer, it's in your web browser. It's an easy language to get started with. I'm a programmer by trade, and I use lots of different languages. Perl is my favorite because it's very flexible, but I use, I don't know, a dozen different languages. So it doesn't matter to me. Whichever one you find easy to understand is a good place to start with. So, you know, if you're a big spreadsheet user, there's a system called MATLAB or something like that, which can do some of this kind of simulation work. And there's an open source variant of that. It's not a programming language, it's a programming environment to do mathematical calculations. And so you might find that easier than using a real programming language. But what I'm talking about here is just pick up a programming language and start learning how do variables and subroutines work. And from there, you can, you know, go a little further. And this will be valuable for you, not just in writing these simulations, but all kinds of things. There are things you can do at your job. There are things you can do with your kids. There are things you can do with your friends because you're able to do a little scripting. Yeah, Jeff.
There's a language called Rex.
Right.
R-E-X-X.
Yeah.
Very human readable. And there are variants out there for Windows and
Right.
other operating systems as well. If somebody wants to kind of get in and feel a little comfortable right off the bat, that's pretty human readable and can do a lot of what JT's kind of showing
Yeah.
there.
So
The
for
more complex you make it, the more complex you make it, right?
right.
As a starting point, maybe kind of a learning point, Rex is pretty good.
Right. So in the back of the room, just for internet people, hopefully you can hear me, Jeff was suggesting Rex is a very human-readable programming language, and it is. I haven't used it since my Amiga days, but I mean, it's been around a long time.
We still use it off and on in Mayo.
Okay, so he still uses it at Mayo. But yeah, there are lots, I mean, there are hundreds of programming languages, and different ones have different levels of human readability, different levels of flexibility, different levels of modules, libraries that you can use that will give you functionality that you don't have to write. There's all kinds of things. So you just kind of have to go out there and explore based on your needs and that sort of stuff.
Maybe
So.
Component Studio needs to have an app for that.
I'm not even going to repeat that. Not even going to repeat that. This is terrible. Okay. So yeah, that's it. Unless there are other questions, we can adjourn for lunch. All right. Thank you.